Hello, everyone. Oh, come on. Too much light, maybe. I don't know. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Kris. So yesterday I did a video which I have not put up yet about a former slave named Robert Smalls who ended up escaping, and fascinating story. It was like a mini movie. So because of that, I wanted to cover a couple of other slaves. Really? We doing that now? It's nice outside, so people want to be out and doing stuff. Like, shut up. So, anyways, this is Uncovering History, William Billy Lee, Slave, American, and Founder, Part 12. It's just their series. He just happens to be Part 12. Before we get started, 1,000 views and only 32 thumbs up. That's hard. You can, don't pay attention to that. You can thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You saw what I did. It was pretty easy. You can donate to the channel through the thanks button, request a video, and your name sponsors that video. Okay? I don't know what they're going to cover, but let's get into it.
Uncovering History, the Founding Fathers and Those in Their Shadows. Part 12, William Billy Lee, Slave, American, and Founding Father. Little is known about the vast majority of slaves that labored the tobacco fields in the scorching Virginia summer sun, as they worked the fields from dawn to dusk for some 12 to 13 hours a day. Many of these people served alongside and stood in the shadows of the likes of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and many others. Life for a slave began with a long
Sorry, I just realized it was really bad quality.
transatlantic voyage from West Africa to America or the Caribbean in the most tumultuous conditions. One specific ship had a 454-person capacity, but was stuffed beyond measure with some 600 slaves. Many who unwillingly boarded would never disembark the ship alive, as they perished from a swath of diseases and deficiencies ranging from typhoid fever, dysentery, smallpox, yellow fever, starvation, dehydration, and so much more. The lifeless corpses were then heaved off the main deck of the ship into the ocean as sharks followed closely behind, devouring them almost instantly. Not having access to restrooms and literally shackled to the person next to them, they would sit in their own excrement and urine for weeks on end in the belly of the ship. The locals always knew when a slave ship was approaching the port, as the horrific stench from the ships traveled for miles. From there, the surviving slaves that were not in mortal danger were oiled up to help their muscles glisten in the sun before the bidding began. One afternoon at the local slave auction, an elderly woman, Mrs. Mary Ball Smith Lee, wanted to sell a 16-year-old African-American boy, William Lee. Most of the slaves only held a first name, but William bared the last name of his owner. William also had a brother by the name of Frank, who was also for sale. The two men were described as mulatto, being descended from a white parent, most likely a man, and a black mother. The term mulatto has its origin from mule, which is the blending of a female horse and a male donkey. Present in the crowd that day was Colonel George Washington, who saw great potential with both the youths. Purchasing the young men, Washington immediately had them shipped to Mount Vernon, placing William in the house.
I'm sorry. Did I misunderstand that? I apologize. Let me go back.
Also had a brother by the name of Frank, who was also for sale. The two men were described as mulatto, being descended from who began. One afternoon at the local slave auction, an elderly woman, Mrs. Mary Ball Smith Lee, wanted to sell a 16-year-old.
Okay. So from my understanding, she never took them to an auction. The husband died, and Washington had paid her a visit, And then at the house, he had asked her about Billy Lee. And Billy didn't want to leave without his brother, frankly. And so he asked about both. She shot him a price, or she refused. And then she agreed. The price was too high. He refused to pay it. And then I think they negotiated, and then he ended up paying, I think, what she had wanted, full price. Yeah, but it wasn't at a slave. It was this all happened at her house. That's what confused me. The auction part, there was never any auction to speak of, unless they've changed what the narrative that they've said how he purchased him.
African American boy, William Lee. Most of the slaves only held a first name, but William bared the last name of his owner. William also had a brother by the name of Frank, who was also for sale. The two men were described as mulatto, being descended from a white parent, most likely a man, and a black mother. The term mulatto has its origin from mule, which is the blending of a female horse and a male donkey. Present in the crowd that day was Colonel George Washington, who saw great potential with both the youths. Purchasing the young men, Washington immediately had them shipped to Mount Vernon, placing William in the house, using him as a valet. As Washington's valet, William had a vast number of responsibilities. Before Washington would rise in the morning, Lee would have his outfit neatly folded and prepared. After Washington dressed, Lee would then comb his master's hair back, placing it in a braid. If Washington was going to a ball or a formal dinner, Lee would rub some pomade in the palms of his hands, running them through Washington's hair, and then powdering it with a white powder. On hunting days, which were frequent, upon leaving the house, William would have one of Washington's horses, Nelson or Blueskin, saddled and readied for the fox hunt. William was responsible for watching the dogs, chasing the game, and blowing the horn for the hunters. William, himself, must have possessed a great number of skills on horseback while riding next to Washington, who was regarded as one of the greatest horsemen of his time. Lee's stature was described as compact and stout with a muscular build. Beyond that, we know nothing what William looked like, as no portraits of him exist. There is, however, one image that is almost certainly Lee. After the American victory at Princeton, Charles Willson Peale was commissioned to paint a life-size portrait of Washington. Standing in the background of the portrait appears to be Lee holding Washington's horse, as Washington stands victorious beside a cannon with Nassau Hall in the distance. The individual looks to be white, which Lee, being mulatto, would certainly have been possible. It is also said that Lee had a wide variety of opinions about many topics, and wasn't afraid to share them, being the antithesis of Washington, who rarely spoke. When the war officially began in 1776, Washington brought William Lee, his trusted valet, to serve by his side. Over the course of the next 7 years of war, Lee would diligently serve by Washington's side. Lee was certainly trusted by Washington, as he would have had access to some of Washington's most intimate secrets and information during the course of the war, as he was in charge of safekeeping Washington's papers containing detailed information about the war and attack plans. Lee would also have been present during key strategic meetings that detailed attack plans against the British. During a time when the British offered asylum and freedom for slaves, it would have been quite easy for Lee to defect from his slave status over to the British in exchange for freedom. But Lee remained faithful to the man that owned him. This raises the question, did Washington see Lee as more than a piece of chattel or property? It seems that over the course of time, something more than a mere master and slave relationship developed. Perhaps a lasting bond of friendship developed that transcended that until the death of Washington. After all, Lee was at Washington's side for the entirety of the war. On one occasion, during a battle, Washington was with his commanding generals, Alexander Hamilton, John Lawrence, and Marquis de Lafayette, when he called Lee, "Billy, hand me my horse." So when Washington rode into the thick of battle, William was right there by his side, perhaps even offering up advice to Washington with regard to strategic decisions. Of course, this is conjecture because we know so little about William, but there is little to no doubt in my mind that Washington privately consulted Lee about critical choices, as Washington was always willing to listen to others and make an informed decision based on all the information gathered. In December 1783, after the long drawn-out war with Britain ended and America was victorious, General Washington, promising to be home for Christmas, rode up the pathway to Mount Vernon on horseback with none other than William Lee by his side. As the two of them cantered towards the estate, they were home at last. America and Washington were free, but Lee was not. It would be difficult to understand how Lee must have felt at this time, knowing that he too stood by his master's side, fighting for freedom, yet did not gain it. So while America now enjoyed the status of freedom, Lee and countless other men and women did not. By this time, Washington would cease purchasing any other slaves during his lifetime, but kept the ones he did own. Perhaps the newly found freedom from the tyrannical oppressors of Great Britain reshaped Washington's thinking as he began to distance himself from the horrible act against fellow human beings. Through some of Washington's diaries and letters, we see that he did give preferential treatment to Lee. In the state of Virginia, marriage between blacks was not recognized as legal and binding. However, after the war, Lee asked Washington to make arrangements for his wife to reside at Mount Vernon. Washington, who apparently knew the woman and did not particularly care for her, acquiesced to Lee's request. In a letter, Washington says, "The mulatto fellow William, who has been with me all the war, is attached, married to, he says, to one of his own color, a free woman. I never wish to see her more, yet I cannot refuse his request, as he lived with me so long and followed my fortunes through the war with fidelity. She is called Margaret Thomas Lee." Nothing more exists about Lee and his wife that is extant, as no record indicates that she ever even arrived at Mount Vernon. In the late 1780s, Lee would
if she did, she didn't stay. But I don't know if she ever actually went there. I'm sure she did, but I don't think she stayed. But I thought he had kids with her. I don't know.
Ceased to be Washington's valet and personal attendant, as he shattered his kneecap, crippling him for life. Washington logged in his diary, "With much difficulty, I was able to get him to Abingdon, being obliged to get a sled to carry him on as he could neither walk, stand, or ride." This was a devastating blow for Lee, no doubt, since he had served by Washington's side since his mid-teens. It's plausible that Washington, who never had any biological children of his own, made Lee an adopted child, or at least Lee, having no known father, may have felt that way towards Washington, living out the rest of his days at Mount Vernon. And after the passing of Washington, Lee developed somewhat of a celebrity status, as the frequent visitors to Mount Vernon estate would inquire of Lee to tell stories of the adventures both he and the general shared. Rarely did people write directly about specific slaves and mention them by name, but William, or Billy as many called him, was frequently mentioned. According to the adopted grandson of Washington, George Washington Parke Custis, he said when a war veteran arrived at the estate, they immediately inquired if Billy was around. Custis said Lee would send his compliments to the soldier, requesting an interview at his quarters. It was never denied, and Billy, after receiving a warm grasp of the hand, would say, "Ah, Colonel, glad to see you. We of the Army don't see one another often in these times of peace. The new time people don't know what we old soldiers did and suffered for the country in the old war." While Washington was still alive, one visitor said his servant Billy, the faithful companion of his military career, was always at his side, smiling content, animated and beamed on every countenance in his presence. By this time, Lee was also a freed man, as Washington promised in his will to free him upon death. Not only did Washington free Lee from the bonds of slavery, Lee was also given a retirement pension as long as he lived for his great services to Washington and his country. Lee's service to the United States of America is an untold story of an individual who stood in the shadows of giants, but was an unsung hero of this great country we call the United States of America. His service to our nation should never go unnoticed, and in my opinion, William Billy Lee is among the founding fathers of America.
Okay. Well, that was pretty interesting. I have a book, but it's called The Ballad of Billy Lee. It's not. There's nothing written from Billy Lee, so the author took creative licensing in coming up with the book and conversations and stuff like that. It's a good book, but it's in the end, it's not real in terms of conversations. It's real in terms of historical truth, where he was with Washington at X and he was with Washington at Y, but it's just called The Ballad of Billy Lee. Not a very big book. Oh, my chest popped. I don't see it. Anyways, we're going to end this here. I hope you enjoyed it. Trying to cover a little bit more slave or, people who don't get the recognition and should. And this is one of them. So I'm going to end it here. Until next time, have a good day, have a good night.